it's Kwai. This is my first cooking glossary and it's about knives. Okay, when you're in a kitchen, one thing that you're very likely to use is a knife. And so I've got a selection here of knives that you would probably use. On the chopping board here we have a paring knife, otherwise known as a fruit knife, best for cutting starchy fruits like bananas, oranges, that kind of thing, but generally not a very useful knife in the kitchen. You have your vegetable and fruit and non-meat, basically anything non-meat, meat cleaver or cleaver knife. I guess you can't really call it a meat cleaver if it's not for cutting meat. So it's a non-meat cutter blade thing. The difference between this and a meat cleaver is that it's very, very, very light, and this is very, very heavy, as you can hear from a thud on the chopping board. This is more tinny, and this is more of a thud. And this is really good if you want to break things like shoulder joints or thigh joints, and you just go like that and the whole thing just cut. It's just like you can just chop straight through. These are chopping knives. You can use them for slicing, but they are primarily chopping knives. So the action of using the knife is this: you're chopping. Sometimes you can slice, but it is generally not the main purpose of the knife. This knife is known as a cook's knife or a chef's knife, and it's known because of the shape. It's a very versatile knife. You can chop things up like this, or the main use of any knife is to any kind of chopping knife is to slice. And the technique to slice is to come down on your object and pull back. So you come down and pull back. This technique means that the knife is almost always on the board, and it means you can chop things much, much quicker. You see a lot of people who don't cook very often, and even people who do cook often, and they'll try to use this knife like a chopping knife, and they'll cut like this, and they'll be wondering why their things aren't chopping up very well. And it's because if you think about the surface of this, it's curved. So if you chop down, you miss all this surface area around the other parts of the knife, which means that you really have to try and use this as a slicing knife. And the proper chef's technique is to come down slightly forward and pull back. And you'll find that if you watch any cooking programs, that's how they chop things very fast. This is a plain edged diamond bladed knife, which means that it stays sharp for very long. I'll get to the sharpening in a minute. And this is a serrated cook's knife. You may notice on my board that I don't have a bread knife. I do eat bread, but I find that it's much better to cut bread with a serrated cook's knife, because it's very, very finely serrated, than a bread knife. You don't get crumbs everywhere when you're cutting the bread. It all kind of stays on the bread. Then you have your carving knife. This is primarily a knife used after you've cooked. So it's a table knife, and it's used with a big fork usually, which I don't have. One of those big two-pronged forks. This is what you see people carving turkeys with. It's a carving knife. So it's well balanced, well weighted, and because of its shape, it means that meat can come off the knife very easily. You can cut through the meat, and there's nothing to get caught on. If you try to do it with a cook's knife, when you're cutting cooked meat, you'll find that the meat gets caught on the knife very easily, whereas it doesn't on a carving knife. The balance means that you can cut very, very fine slices of meat if you wish to. So these are very handy. They're very handy before cooking as well, for cutting meat. I actually use this to cut meat with instead of my meat cleaver, so that I don't disturb my neighbours, and also because it's a very good knife to use. Look, for the same purpose that you can cut very thin slices after you've cooked, you can cut very thin slices before you cook too. And because of the balance, it's usually a good knife to use anyway. But don't use it for vegetables or fruit, because of the long blade, it's fairly ineffective for short fruits, anything which is small. But when I cut meat, I generally cut big bits of meat, which means that it's very handy to have a long knife. And you may notice that the knife is actually much longer than a cook's knife by about 1 inch, which makes a lot of difference. Then we have the knife sharpener. The knife sharpener is so important. I, myself personally, sharpen my knife before every single use. Most accidents in the kitchen, most cut accidents in the kitchen from a knife are because the knife is blunt. This is when you cut on something and the knife buckles to one side, as you can't slice through the object well enough, and you cut your finger. That is the #1 accident in the kitchen. So the best thing to do is to get a knife sharpener, which looks like this, and just pull the knife blade across the surface of the knife sharpener on both sides, like so. And you do this with force on both sides, and you will have a sharp knife before you start cutting, and you can really feel the difference. If you do it every single time, you don't have to spend half an hour trying to sharpen up your knife, and it's very irritating if you have a blunt knife anyway. But a sharp knife means that you can get stuff cut very quickly, and your job is done a lot quicker. And if you want to cut thin slices of things, then you definitely need a sharp knife. You also get a whetstone sharpener, which is like a rectangular block stone, and you wet your knife and then you pull it across the surface of the stone, just like this, but they put like stuff in it which makes it easier to kind of sharpen the knife blade. So there you go. That is my knife tutorial for you today. I hope you enjoyed it. This is Kwai signing out.